Best ball is probably the fastest growing subset of fantasy football, and for good reason. It is the format that allows you to draft the most. And I don't know anyone that plays fantasy football and doesn't just love the drafting season. So today in this video, I'm going to break down some 2026 best ball strategies for you to incorporate in your best ball drafts. Whether you have never drafted a best ball team before and are just interested in looking into it, or you're an experienced player with drafts under your belt already this season, we're going to have content here for you. First, I'm going to do a quick overview in this video of best ball for those of you less familiar with it, touch on the key points. Then I'm going to go over to a breakdown of positional strengths and weaknesses by round in drafts right now. Today, we're going to be looking at underdog drafts. So if you're familiar there, but it will be widely applicable to multiple different platforms. Then we're going to take that information, look at those positional strengths, and then incorporate it into strategy for roster construction, whether that's your hero RB builds or your zero RB builds. We're going to take a look at a few different constructions and what is good this year in best ball. And finally, I have some tips on timing in best ball drafts, especially with us being early in the best ball season. I'm going to give some tips on those easy to forget aspects of these big fantasy best ball contests and how to get an edge in them. Now, first, let's just go over what best ball is, what these best ball tournaments are like, particularly for those of you that are used to redraft. Now, it's not very different from redraft. Generally, best ball is just that you draft a full team like in redraft, but each week, only the best players on your team, whoever scores the most points, are put into your starting lineup, and that's how the points are counted. So unlike redraft, there is no waivers, there's no weekly lineups to set. You just draft, and then you are done with your team. That's the real benefit. That's why you can draft 100 plus teams, and it doesn't add any extra workload for you during the fantasy season. And I think a misconception among redraft players is that best ball is expensive. It takes a lot to get into. Really, if you play redraft, then you know how to play best ball. There's some tips that we'll run through on strategy. Obviously, that's what this video is about. That's different in best ball than redraft. But for the most part, it is very similar. Financially speaking, you can get drafts as cheap as $3, $5. Do 10 of those in the offseason, and that's like a normal league buy-in. So not out of the range of just regular redraft players. Now looking at Underdog, they have their flagship contest is called Best Ball Mania. This is their 7th iteration of it, their 7th year of it. $25 buy-ins for each draft. $2 million goes to first place. There's also cheaper options. This is just their flagship contest. And the way it progresses through the tournament is weeks 1 through 14. You play against the people that you drafted against. The top 2 teams after those 14 weeks move on to the next round, where you get put into a new randomized group of 14 different teams. The top team from that group advances, and then the top 12 from the following week advance as well. So they have a couple 1-week rounds before a 667 seat final in week 17. So when you hear people talking about week 17 stacking, week 17 game stacking, that is because you're faced against 667 in this case other people's teams that you want to beat. Now, the puppy is something that I find myself drafting in much more. It's a $5 entry to get into these best ball drafts. If you're less familiar with these contests, that's a great place to be able to get a few drafts in there for a lower cost. Very similar setup, $100,000 to first, obviously a lower amount for the lower entry, and a little bit easier to progress into the final than Best Ball Mania is. Still 2 out of 12 through those first 14 weeks. Week 15, you have to come first out of 10. Week 16, you have to come first out of a group of 6, and then on to a 625-seat final in week 17. All right, that's it. You are up to speed with best ball, and now we can get into the strategy aspect here. The first thing that we're going to cover is the positional strengths by round. This is incredibly important for all football drafts, all fantasy football drafts, not just best ball. I know everyone's been in a draft. Anyone who's played any amount of fantasy football knows that there's times you go in a draft, you take some running backs early, build up that running back room, and go, okay, round 6, 7, 8, I'm ready to take my wide receivers. And then you look at the board and it's all running backs at the top still, and you wish you hadn't gone so running back heavy early. So that's what we're trying to avoid here. You definitely don't want to be in that position. So I've gone through round by round on Underdog using their ADP right now to see where the value lies in each round based on position. Now, obviously, some of my personal takes on players is going to seep into here a little bit, but a lot of this is just volume. If you have multiple good options at a position in a round, that's a better round for that position. If only one running back is going in a certain round, then there's a good chance even if you like that running back, you're not going to get them. So that's a much weaker round at that position. So you can see them all here that I have listed out color coded, but now we're going to go through by position and see where you really want to target these players. All right, let's start with the most polarizing position in fantasy football, and that is the running back position. Now, if you hear anyone talk about best ball drafts this year, there is one thing on everyone's minds, and it is that running backs are back in a big way. Back to the old days of building your team around one of these star 300 touch running backs. It seems like we're getting back into that after a few years of wide receivers being the supreme position. Now we're seeing so many running backs go in the first 2 rounds, in the first 5 rounds, in a way that we just haven't seen before, and it's changing up drafts substantially. And the biggest move you're going to see from this is the running back dead zone is going way earlier, much closer to your redraft leagues than what we're used to in these best ball leagues, where they are 3 wide receiver formats and 2 running backs starting. So normally those wide receivers are pushed up a lot higher than your home leagues. Just for example, the RB24 right now is being drafted on Underdog in the 5th round. Earlier in previous years, we've been seeing that as far as the 7th, maybe even 8th round is when that RB24 is going. We're also seeing 13 running backs going in the first 2 rounds alone. So these running backs have been pushed way up the board. Now, you definitely don't want to get caught chasing running backs up the board. I get that. But you also have to be careful here that you don't take what feel like very valuable wide receivers early on and then find yourself looking at the board and seeing Chuba Hubbard or Ramondre Stevenson there as your running back 1. Now, if that's the way you want to plan it, and we will talk about 0 running back builds later, that's okay, but you need to know what you're getting into ahead of time. Now, I thought I was going crazy when I was first looking at the ADP for this year's drafts, post-NFL draft. And I was not. This is very different from what we were looking at last year. I went back to look in my notes to see some ADP markers last year, and you were getting guys in round 7 to 9 running backs that were very much the presumptive starter on their team, maybe not even on really bad offenses. In that round 7 to 9, you were getting guys like Judkins, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard, Travis Etienne, all these guys going in that range. Now in the round 7 to 9 range, there's a lot more question marks, a lot more uncertainty. We're looking at RJ Harvey, Ramondre Stevenson, Kyle Mononga, and Rico Dowdle. That's a stark drop off from what we were seeing in those rounds last year. Generally speaking, I think just rounds 6 through 9, there's not a whole lot of differentiation from those guys to the guys a little bit later in drafts where the opportunity cost is just so much lower. Now, that's not to say you should draft no one in round 6 through 9 at the running back position. There will be guys that fall to you. There will be certain roster constructions that it works out. I'm not saying you can't even have a take where someone in those rounds is someone you really believe in. I'm just saying there's not a lot of options there. Don't build your team around getting a lot of running backs in those rounds. All right, so you can see here the running backs in these ranges of drafts right now. Well, I like Tootin. He's at the top of that 6 to 9 range here, and I've seen him go above that in a lot of drafts. Even Tootin isn't safe from having some holes in his profile. Good offense, but we have never seen him take on a starting role in the NFL. We're not even sure that he will be the starter for sure in Jacksonville at this stage. But other guys in this range, especially, it's looking like they're going to be on the wrong side of a timeshare. Think about Stevenson, Harvey, Monungai, Corum, or if they do have a better shot at being the starter in their offense, it's not for a good offense that we want a lot of pieces of. Fitting into that, Chuba Hubbard, Tony Pollard, Jalen Warren. Now, the name of the game here is opportunity cost. Now, I think most of the running backs in the 6 to 9 range are better than the 11 to 13 range, but they're supposed to be because you're giving up more to get them here. The guys that you're giving up at quarterback, especially in that round 6 to 9, are some of the elite guys. You can get like Jane Daniels and Jalen Hurts early in that range. Compared to what you're getting in rounds 11 to 13, it's just a huge drop off at other positions. At wide receiver too, tight end as well, you're giving up guys like Jordan Tyson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Chris Godwin, QJ, Ricky Pearsall. These are guys that I see great ceiling outcomes for and still quite high floors. And you're giving that up to take a running back that's maybe a little bit higher of a floor than the guys in that 11 to 13 range. That's where I really think the difference is made here. And let's just look at these rounds 11 through 13 running backs. You've got guys that are pass catching backs with some upside to take on more rushing volume than they're expected to. Guys like Rashad White, Woody Marks. Those give you solid floors, and there is some ceiling outcomes there for them as well. I look at guys like Keaton Mitchell and Isaiah Pacheco in this range, guys that are in really explosive, good offenses. And even though they're the clear backup and not going to take over the starting job, they very well could find their way into the end zone 7 or 8 times in a season. And getting them in the 11th to 13th round, they're going to be in your starting lineup, I think, more often than someone in that range would normally go. Now, some values that I find particularly good here, the Vikings running backs and Charbonnet. The Vikings, I think, will have a great bounce back season, and I don't want to get too much here into my own takes, but it's not hard to project that that would be a better offense than, say, the Steelers, and we have both Steelers running backs going well ahead of the Vikings running backs here, and I don't think there's a huge skill difference there to make up that difference. Also, Charbonnet coming off of a Super Bowl winning season for a very run-heavy offense, and now the top back is replaced by a rookie. I get Jadarian Price, first-round rookie, but still a rookie nonetheless. Charbonnet, when he is back and healthy, will have a role in this offense, possibly even a starting role in this offense. I am going to try and steer clear here of too many of just my takes, who I'm drafting a lot of, who I think you should take. I'm going to do a video later on more guys to target, and particularly stacking targets to really take advantage of it in these drafts. But today we'll focus more on the high-level strategy approach. And now we'll move over to the wide receiver position. Like I mentioned, the running backs have been pushed way up boards, and that means that you're getting some value on wide receivers where you're not used to taking them in these best ball drafts. And outside of that round 3 to 6 range, where I think a lot of the really good wide receivers that were probably going more in the 2 to 4 range a year ago, we also have a nice little pockets in round 14 to 15 roughly, where I see some guys that still have good upside, probably that last real tier of guys that I'm confident taking some shots on. Anything after that, you really have to squint to see any upside. Where you don't want to be relying on taking wide receivers is these rounds 11 to 13 range. There I see honestly no substantial difference between them and what you're getting in rounds 14 and 15. In a lot of cases, I have the guys in rounds 14 and 15 ranked even higher than that 11 to 13 range. And in that 11 to 13 range, we just talked about how there are a lot of running backs there that still have some potential to build your team, your bench out with. But the the tight ends and the quarterbacks, that's where their tiers really end. There's not, we'll get into their positions later, but there's not a whole lot of late quarterback and tight end options like there have been in previous years. So I want to make sure that I've filled out my quarterback and tight end positions by that 11 to 13 round range and not taking wide receivers here. When you're looking at these round 11 to 13 wide receivers, they have much less solidified roles in their offenses than the wide receivers taking a tier above them. And I don't see much more of a ceiling outcome than the wide receivers a tier below them here in rounds 14 to 15. That's why I'd much rather take that benefit in opportunity cost and take those guys in rounds 14 and 15. If you look at just the players here, Jalen Naylor and Trey Tucker both have a shot at being that wide receiver one for the Raiders. Getting that in rounds 14 or 15, that is great value to me. Even if the Raiders aren't a great team, wide receiver one opportunity is not something you can pass up in that range. We also have rookie wide receivers that project to be in 3 wide receiver sets in Antonio Williams and Dejon Stribling. And these are for powerhouse, or potentially at least, powerhouse offenses with the Commanders and the 49ers. These aren't bad teams, and they could have some real roles as the wide receiver 3 or maybe even 2 on their teams. All right, now moving over to the quarterback position, I am in love with the 6th round for quarterbacks in these underdog drafts. I think that people are reacting way too harshly to some down seasons, some injury-filled seasons for Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts in particular. People reacting to Drake May preemptively to a regression here. I think the 6th round is the strongest we've seen at quarterback ever since I've been drafting. And if you miss out on those 6th round quarterbacks, rounds 8 to 10 have a really good tier of quarterbacks that maybe don't have that same floor as we're seeing from these early quarterbacks, but they still have breakout potential, the ability to have a big season. Guys like Matt Stafford or Jordan Love or these types of quarterbacks. Now moving over to the tight ends. You look at any of these tight ends in the early rounds, I think really up to round 8. I think we're looking at like Fannin there. I think all those guys are very well priced. The position's much more sporadic early on than obviously other positions, but I think I'm happy with any of the guys in those ranges. And then after that, you're looking at that 11 to 13 range where I like the depth tight ends around there more so than the other rounds. Kind of like quarterback. We're down in the later parts of the draft compared to what we may be used to in best ball. I know last year there were a lot of late tight ends that I was a big fan of to build out these 3 tight end teams where I could grab Hunter Henry late or Juwan Johnson late and have a tight end room of 3 that I'm very comfortable with. This season, I'm going to be looking more for these 2 tight end teams, like I'm looking for more 2 quarterback teams because I feel much more confident in those early round guys. All right, now that we've looked at the positional values across rounds, it's time to get into this roster construction part. And that's what people love about best ball, is you're going to have fantasy analysts all over the place that talk about how 0 RB is the way to go. It's the only way to draft, and you got to draft every team that way. Some people just live and die by a certain roster construction. Now, that's not my style, but I do want to show you how to incorporate kind of the strengths and weaknesses of this year's ADP values to put them into these different roster construction buckets and be able to make the most of each of those different styles. So I'm going to take a look at 3 different roster construction styles here. First, the 0 RB. A lot of people are big fans of it. Then hero RB, one running back early to really anchor your team. And then the robust RB strategy of really building out your team through the running back room. Also preface this quickly by saying don't go into a draft and say, I will absolutely draft 0 running back. If you're drafting at pick 7 and Bijan falls to you there, like, take him. Don't go 0 RB just because you said you would. Next draft you can go 0 RB. don't feel like you have to be too strict about it going in. All right, starting off with zero RB here, 2026 may look like the death of zero RB because of how much they've been pushed up, but the opposite might be true. This might be a good year to get some of those zero RB teams in your portfolio, because all the wide receiver talent is dropping down the boards in round 2, round 3, round 4. You're going to get wide receiver talent that you weren't getting in previous years. And first, I should just define what I'm calling a zero RB team here. For the purposes of these roster constructions, I'm going to say that zero RB is that you take no running back in the first 4 rounds of your draft. Some people define it a little stricter and say none in the first 5 rounds, or maybe even none in the first 6 rounds. But I'm just going to say the first 4 rounds, if you don't take an RB, that's going to be a zero RB team. And when you're looking at the overall construction at the end of your draft, normally on these underdog drafts, you're going to be looking at something like 3-5-7-3. So it's 3 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 7 wide receivers, 3 tight ends, or 2-6-8-2, something like that. With your zero RB teams, you're going to be looking more in that 7, maybe 6, 7, 8 running backs. Probably 6 to 7 is your sweet spot. And that's because you're not spending early draft capital on these running backs. You don't have guys that absolutely should hit. So you take a few more chances later on to hope that the sum of all of these guys makes enough spike weeks to fill out your 2 running back slots. That also means you're not going to stock up on wide receivers because you're getting so many early wide receivers while you're not taking those running backs. And this is a good opportunity to mention a golden piece of advice for best ball, and that is to not draft scared. You're trying to find the absolute best case scenario for your team and draft for that scenario to happen. That's how you win big money in these tournaments, not by hoping that things go okay in your with the team you've drafted. So what I mean by that is basically if you're drafting wide receivers early, if you take 3 wide receivers in the first 3 rounds, you're not betting like, oh, I need to take an 8th wide receiver, 9th wide receiver in case those guys get injured. If those guys get injured, you're probably not advancing past the first round anyways, so don't consider that when you're taking your late round picks. Consider what happens if those guys hit. Who do I need to draft with my later round picks? Now, when we're looking at the first 4 rounds of a zero RB draft, it's pretty simple. You're going to be taking a lot of wide receivers, and personally, I like to get 1 elite QB or tight end. Now, this isn't a strict rule. You don't need to leave round 4. Maybe you grab that in round 5 or even 6. But I do like to get an advantage at one of those onesie positions. The rest of your pick's going to be wide receivers, so you're probably going to exit those first 4 rounds with at least 3 wide receivers in your build. Ideally, if I can get a Bowers or a Josh Allen or Trey McBride in these first couple rounds as well, I'm very happy to do that. Now, some of the zero RB purists out there are going to be upset about me saying that round 5 is when you can start looking for the running back position. I think that's even more true this year, where round 5 is really the end of your starting running backs in the NFL, the guys that are clearly the number 1 on their team. You can still get guys in this range. Previous years, you were able to get that in round 7, but not anymore. So at round 5, I'm okay looking for my RB1. Again, I'd much rather someone like Judkins or Swift be my running back 1, take them in round 5, than try and push that another round or 2 and be stuck looking at Ramondre Stevenson as the top guy in ADP for running back to fill my RB1 spot. And after I fill that RB1 spot in this zero RB build, I'm keeping an eye on RB for the rest of the draft. I always am going to look who's available near the top of ADP at the running back position, because I'm going to need to build this out by volume. Now, that's not to say that I'm just going to blindly select running backs from round 5 to 8 here. Like I said, round 6 through 9 are not really where I want to be taking my running backs. So I will take a running back that has good value to me in that range, but I'm also still willing to add wide receivers, to add a quarterback or a tight end to my roster here and keep pushing out the real depth of my RB room after I get that first running back. Now, having said that, I do want to leave round 8, I'd say here, with at least 2 running backs. I don't want to be going into that later part of the draft with only 1 running back on my roster. Now, I said it's good to take Allen or maybe Lamar early on in these kind of builds, but if I miss out on those quarterbacks in my 0 RB builds, I'm almost certainly in round 6 or 7 going to take one of these quarterbacks, one of these, I think, still elite quarterbacks that are going in this range. And that's especially the case if you already have the stacking partners with them. Some guys like Chase and Higgins, McLaurin, Devonta Smith, A.J. Brown, Loveland, they're probably going before this round 6 range or around it. So if you have one of those guys to stack with the quarterbacks, even better to take them here. Now, when you're in this 5 to 8 range, you already have 3, maybe even 4 wide receivers on your roster. I'm going to be a lot more careful about taking a wide receiver here. If a great value falls to me, I'm not going to be scared of taking my 4th wide receiver in this range, but I'm definitely not seeking it out here. Now looking at the rounds 9 through 13 range, in here I'm going to start hammering in that depth at the wide receiver or at the running back position to kind of Frankenstein together an RB2 or even help out in that RB1 spot from time to time. That's just what you have to do here. It also lines up with what I said where I want to target my running backs, that round 11 to 13 range, the back half of this part of the draft. I am very happy to get some of the running backs in there. I've also said there's some quarterback and tight ends in this range that I'm very happy about. So I'm going to supplement my RB picks with the quarterback and tight end to make sure that I can at least one of the onesies, QB or tight end, that I'm fine ending after 2. And in a lot of these drafts, I'm going to leave with 2 quarterbacks and 2 tight ends because I take them here in the middle rounds so that I can absolutely hammer volume on my running backs. Whether or not I want to take any wide receivers in this range really depends on what I did leading up to rounds 9 through 13. If I come into this range with only 3 wide receivers still that I took in rounds 1 through 4, then I'm going to add a couple in this range and build out that depth a little bit. If I already got to 4 or 5 wide receivers coming into this range, then I'm okay just waiting until the end of the draft and picking up 1 or 2 more guys there. And that takes you to round 14, where you're just filling out the roster construction here, trying to get to that 6 to 7 running backs at that stage, depending on how much draft capital you put in those mid rounds. And that's really what this comes down to on roster construction. If you put more draft capital early, you don't need as much volume. If you, like you do in a 0 RB build, don't have a lot of high draft capital running backs, you're going to try and make up for that with volume, with these late plays on guys that can hopefully break out. All right, now let's switch it up slightly and go into the hero RB builds. The big difference here is you want 1 stud running back on your team. I'm defining that as just any running back from rounds 1 through 4, but increasingly this year, you really want someone in the first 1 or 2 rounds max to really anchor your running back room. Once you get towards the end of round 4, you're looking more at, is this a dead zone running back? And that is not a hero RB. Now, in addition to my 1 hero running back, I'm going to be taking some wide receivers here. I don't want to fall too far behind at wide receiver, so I'm not really focused on the elite tight ends, Josh Allen, those onesie positions. That's not to say you can't take them, but wide receivers are, all things equal, more valuable here. Now, when we move to rounds 5 to 8, this is where I want to solidify my advantage at wide receiver. I'm going to take another 2 to 3 wide receivers here so that I am absolutely winning my flex with my wide receiver. So I'm getting the first team to 4 wide receivers so that I can build out that advantage. Like I've said before, I love the 6th round quarterback, so I'm probably going to sprinkle in a 6th round quarterback here as well. If not that, then I'll probably take one of the earlier tight ends, possibly even both here. Now, running back on a hero RB team, normally you're not going to take any here in 5 to 8, and I'm okay with that, especially with that 6 to 9 range being so weak at running back this year. I'm okay just skipping running back here totally. That being said, if a value falls to me, if Swift ends up in the 7th round, then yes, I will take that running back value. Now getting into rounds 9 to 13, this is where you build out that running back 2 slot. You're not going to have one guy that you look at and say, I'm comfortable with that as my RB2 for the season. But hopefully between 3 or 4 guys in this range through the end of the draft, you can say that those together I can Frankenstein into a real running back 2. Maybe one of them breaks out in and is your RB2 all season, and that is great if that happens. But if not, you're hoping for spike weeks spread out among all these running backs to give you enough for a good RB2. Like I've said, I like to end a lot of these drafts with 2 quarterbacks or 2 tight ends, possibly just 2 of each. So this is another place where I'm okay taking my second quarterback here, even if I went with one of those round 6 quarterbacks. I'm okay with taking my second tight end towards the end of this range, even if I went with one of the earlier tight ends. Now, if I took McBride or Bowers or Josh Allen, I probably don't need to here. I can wait until the later rounds and just take my second onesie position there. But anything a little later, I'm okay with the 2 good players here. And by here, I should have all the wide receiver draft capital that I need. Maybe I'll add 1 or possibly 2 late in the draft. But at this stage, unless there's a great wide receiver value, I'm probably set here. And again, rounds 14 plus, you are just filling out that roster to get to these recommended roster construction numbers. You're still a little higher on the running back in this build, unless you really found some value in the mid rounds. And now finally, let's look at the robust RB build. This is what I've been trending towards this season. I just like the running backs early on. I don't like falling behind at running back. Not saying it is the only strategy this year, but it's the one I've been taking the most often. Now, defining this one, I'm just going to say that 2+ running backs taken in the first 4 rounds is going to be a robust RB strategy. So you look at rounds 1 to 4. I really find myself liking rounds 1 to 3 in particular at running back. Early on, obviously, Gibbs and Bijan. I really like Achane. A lot of the upside running backs around the turn. Jeremiah Love, I think, has good upside. Ashton Genty. So a lot of good running backs here that I'm very happy to take at least 2 of, even possibly 3 in the first 4 rounds. So that leaves me taking maybe 1 to 2 wide receivers. And here's somewhere where I really am not looking to take Bowers or McBride or Josh Allen unless there's a real fall, just because I don't want to fall so far behind at wide receiver early. Then once we move over into rounds 5 to 8, if I only take 2 running backs in those first 4 rounds, I absolutely have no problem taking my 3rd running back in this range, especially before that round 6 to 9 drop off. But if I took 3 wide receivers in those first 4 rounds, there's very few scenarios where I'm taking a 4th running back in this range. Instead, this range is about building up those wide receivers. So I'm going to take 2 to 3 wide receivers in this range so I don't fall too far behind at the position. And then I'm looking also at some high value quarterback tight end options in this range. I'll probably only go for one of those, maybe one of those 6th round quarterbacks, or one of the Loveland if he falls, or Fannin, Warren, Kraft kind of tight ends. Most importantly, though, wide receiver in this range. I like a lot of the wide receivers in this range. I think there's still great values in this range. This is where I like to target them, and that's why I'm sticking with so much of the robust RB drafts. Once we get into rounds 9 to 13 here, I want to make sure that my tight end 1 is filled by the end of this range. I really don't want to have to call together 3 tight ends real late in draft, so at least a 1 tight end filled here, and then also get my second QB in this range. Like I've said, not very confident in the late round QBs this year. I'd rather get 2 guys that I feel more confident about, and by round 13, they're starting to dry up. And then after that, it's just about building out my depth, mostly at wide receiver, that is. If running back, I'm still sitting at 3 running backs, then yes, I will take a 4th running back here if I get a good value, but I'm more looking to build out my depth at wide receiver in this range still. And then round 14 plus, again, we're just looking to get to those numbers. I don't need more than 5 running backs in these builds, 4 if I get my 4th one fairly early. Wide receivers where I'm going to get the bigger numbers. I'm looking at 8 to 9 in most drafts. 7 would be a little more rare if I found some really great value in those mid rounds. So those are the roster construction types that I'm looking at, the strategies I'm looking at in best ball. Now I'll just wrap this up with a couple quick tips here. Some things that I don't think enough people think about in best ball, especially this time of year. So these are general timing considerations. We're early in best ball. Best ball is going to go in into September up until the NFL season starts. So we're in the early days here in May. And with that comes some considerations. First, quick fill versus long fill contests. Best Ball Mania is an example of a long fill contest. It's open now, but it runs all the way and will be filling into probably the start of September. So who you draft now, once you get past your first round, if you advance past the first round, you're competing with people that were drafting possibly in August or September. So a very different landscape. Compared to something like the puppy, which they fill very quickly. I expect this first puppy to be filled entirely by May. So everyone's looking at a very similar landscape when they are drafting. There's a lot of takeaways you can take from this. One that I really want to take away is that when you hear people talk about getting uniqueness by reaching for someone, usually on that first, second round kind of turns, to try and get that unique pairing of players. I'm okay with that in the puppies right now. I don't think that's smart in Best Ball Mania. It doesn't make any sense in these long fill contests because ADP is going to shift. If those guys that you were getting at the 1-2 turn are closer to the 2-3 turn, or when it comes time to draft in August, then you're not getting a benefit anymore. You just reached on a player who other people are getting at a value later on in that same position with those same combinations. So don't reach for uniqueness in these long fill contests early. The second piece around timing here is that we just have lower information right now than if you're drafting in August, in September. At that point, you've seen the training camp news, you've seen how they've handled competitions in preseason, and I don't think there's anywhere where that matters more than the backup running back spots. And that plays into a lot of what we've talked about with strategy, roster construction. Think of last year, guys like JCM, Manungai, Corum, how he beat out Hunter. These were the backup running backs that really solidified over that maybe August period. And we saw that they were going to increase in value. Because we have a lot less running back information, backup running back, committee running back information here, it just pushes those top running backs up boards for me early in the process. Even if they're not the top running backs in familiar situations that are stable without much changes around them. I'm thinking DeAndre Swift, Quinshon Judkins, even Cam Scadaboo. I think these guys are the kind of guys that are benefiting from this lack of information because we don't expect things to change much. Honestly, it's harder at this stage in drafts to bet on those late round guys at the running back position because we just don't have the information. I'm confident that I can win as someone who keeps up with that NFL training camp news in later in the season here in August, even in July, by getting some of those edges on those late running backs. At this stage, it's all guesses. And finally, unsigned veterans. This happens every year, and I don't know why people haven't caught on, but if a veteran doesn't have a team name beside them, they fall down draft boards just automatically. We've seen this last year with guys like Keenan Allen, who flew up boards after he was signed. We're seeing it this year already with Juwan Jennings and now David Njoku. They're starting to rise after they've recently signed. It's just happening over and over again, and there's still a few veteran receivers in particular to keep an eye on. Deebo Samuel and Stephon Diggs are two that I'm going to be drafting well above their ADP for a little bit here, getting the values on them. But even Tyreek Hill as well, going very late in drafts. And then someone that doesn't really fit, but James Conner. I don't expect him to be with Arizona all season or even when the season starts. He's a great cut candidate or trade candidate now that the Cardinals have so much RB depth on their team. All right, there you have it. That's our best ball strategy video for this week. I'm going to come back with more takes on stacking pairings, on players just generally to target who I like in these ranges. So if you're interested in more best ball content, go ahead and subscribe. We're also going to try and get into some live drafts for you here on YouTube so that we can interact with you, answer questions about best ball, who you really like in this year's best ball drafts, while we go ahead and draft some teams ourselves.